Has the environmental movement become the new religion for the ultra-rich? If life were logical, men would ride slide saddle. And that's kind of been my look at life since in the early 1990s, the northern spotted owl caused the wholesale devastation of the Pacific Northwest in California. In the 1990s, the owl and I had a battle. I always say I fought the owl and the owl won. It was the environment versus jobs. Children could be sacrifices in order to save a species. I remember I was attending a hearing regarding the mountain lion in California and the ability to be able to hunt the mountain lion when one of the biologists stood up and said, when somebody questioned the wisdom of not having some sort of hunting season on mountain lions, that the genetic diversity for the mountain lion had become so small that it really would be, from a genetic standpoint, more favorable to lose a child rather than a mountain lion. And that's kind of when I knew that there was some issues that were outside the normal environmental community. My second brush with this deep ecology movement was Earth First and the Unabomber. In 1995, I worked at the California Forestry Association when my boss and mentor, Gil Murray, was killed in a bomb blast that the Unabomber had sent a bomb to our office at the California Forestry Association. And in reading his manifesto and subsequent publications, and after he was caught in the cabin in Montana, one of the periodicals that he worked from and took his guidance from was the Earth First Manifesto. And that Earth First journal was a how to kill people to save the environment. I would later come across a book called How to Kill People to Save the Environment. So this is when I started investigating this new environmental movement that was kind of taking the place of the environmental conservation movement. So deep ecology takes root. We're all alone and God is dead. Nietzsche said that or wrote that in a book, and that was the headlines of the New York Times of that era. And we all looked back at the earth from the moon and said, we're all alone here. And that was a big thing, and that was really the birth of the environmental movement that kind of swept away the conservation movement, that with the lake on fire in Lake Erie and some of the widespread devastation that was happening to the earth, it was that picture of looking back at that small blue marble that kind of mobilized people, and they said, wait a minute. There's only one planet and we can't risk it. And that's when the birth of the deep ecology movement was born. It was also the time when people were moving away from the church and science. And again, there are periods in our history where science and religion clash, and this was one of those periods where we had science and religion clashing. The people weren't doing enough to save the environment, and it looked like we were this small ball alone, and we needed someone to save us. And so we started to replace the church with science, and that had ramifications as well. So science is God, solution at all costs. It doesn't matter how much we have to pay to save a species, we have to do it. There was no need for God because science was going to save us. You see this in so many of the studies. Well, it doesn't matter how much it costs to save the spotted owl. We simply have to do it because an owl is equal to a human. So human cost, even in the Endangered Species Act, that was very specific that it would have to have an economic value to it in order to save these species. They basically said, it doesn't matter, we saved the owl, and we basically wiped out the Pacific Northwest and rural California's economy. So population is the enemy. Animals are more important than people, and if we have to kill people to save the environment, we can. So there were factors in the environmental movement. There's the deep ecology, the Gaia movement, and then there's the Environmental Movement Inc. is what I call it, and that's your mainstream Sierra Club Audubon Society. But this other group, Deep Ecology, really took root in California's urban elite, the millionaires, and you see it in some of the movie stars that say they're living a sustainable lifestyle, but yet they fly to the conference in Rio in a jet, and they have private jets. And this new deep ecology was great. It was even better than a religion because you could save the planet, but you didn't have to make any sacrifices. So it was actually better than religion because all you had to do is write a check. There were no consequences. You had rules, but the rules were for other people. There were the commandments, and I put a link at the end of this presentation where you can go to the Deep Ecology site, and it's really fascinating to look at the correlation between the commandments of the Deep Ecology movements as in relationship to the commandments that God gives us, and how they have just basically switched the commandments to look at man and how man interrelates to God, and just kind of put the earth in there. So that becomes the person that we're responsible to, or the entity. So someone else should sacrifice for my consumption. I will take my third car up to my second house and tell a timber worker that he's killing the environment. I write my check, my offering, into the Sierra Club and the Audubon Society, and then I can go out and I can consume without any ramifications at all. The feeling of community that you get from the environmental movement feels just like a church. You're there, you're getting saved. It has the same feeling. We've got songs that mean, we are the world. We'll hold hands together and we'll save the planet. And you got that feeling of community. So you really didn't need to go sit in a church with rules that had specific rules and regulations. You could still have that feeling of community and move on. Consumption without production. That's the other thing. We consume in this country without ever thinking of the producer. Thomas Jefferson said it best, and I have that quote in a minute. So we enter into the 1990s, and that was the era of the forest wars. We had California was having an initiative, and the forest products industry was forced to fight that initiative in order to be able to work on their own private land. This is not public land, private land. So this is the first time the timber industry has really become the villain, and they have to go to the people of California and tell them that we're not bad. And there's this big rural-urban disconnect that Thomas Jefferson describes when he said he did not want to see manufacturing in this country, because he said what that will do is concentrate the wealth in the urban areas, and when the wealth is concentrated in the urban areas, they'll have all the power. And when they have all the power and they don't have to produce anything with their hands, and Jefferson talks about the people that put their hands in the dirt are more connected to God, and they will understand that they don't grow things. It's really God that allows this food to come out of the earth. And he was very concerned about that disconnect, and we're really seeing that here in California. In fact, California is a prime example of you can look at different statements that were made, like the little boy that got off the bus and said, I want to see the pig that lays the biggest bacon. And I have lots of stories, but there's simply not enough time. So the industry had to fight Big Green. And what they did is they hired a doctor, Clotaire Rapai, and he did a study. And there are 3 parts to your brain. There's the intellectual part, there's the emotional part, and then there's that deep inner brain they call the lizard brain. That is your survival instincts and things like that. So what Dr. Rapai does is he does focus groups and gets people to talk until they reach that inner feeling. And what he found He he's done some amazing things with Walt Disney and Simpson Door Company and cheese producers in the United States that were trying to sell cheese to France. And so what he found out about the timber industry is there are archetypes within us, and those archetypes really tell us those emotional things that we may not even realize why we feel. So what he found out is when people see a forest, it's a deep archetype that harkens back to some of their earliest memories. And when you go to the Deep Ecology site at the end of this presentation, you'll see that embedded in there is the forest primeval, and that's what they're trying to protect. Well, when he investigated these urban dwellers archetype, what he found is that the forest to them was their temple. It was their church. And when we showed pictures of men going in to cut trees, what they were doing was desecrating their temple. And so using that information, the forest products industry changed. They became not the timber industry, but they became the forest products industry instead of an industry that focused on the trees they cut. They started focusing on the fact that for 99 years they grow trees and then turn them into a biodegradable, sustainable product. It's a great way to use what is the perfect environmental product. And so it was wonderful, and they got that message out. It was a little too late. So in the 60s and 70s, you had a lot of turmoil and change in business, social, and political. And the 80s and 90s were results of the ramifications of this. And then like the spotted owl and the Delta spelt. Right now, the Delta smelt is the next endangered species that could shut off the water to Southern California. Southern California causes California to be one of the 8th largest economies in the world. And so the political, financial, economic ramifications of an endangered species shutting off the water to all of Southern California is something that everybody's thinking right now, but it still goes back to this feeling of the world as a church and having that deep ecology drive these really draconian environmental policies that don't allow for solutions. So there are some people that have done that, and so what has happened is you've got the last decade was a decade of solutions, conflicts, and litigation, or versus conflicts and litigation. And now people are starting to, 9/11 kind of shifted the paradigm a little bit and made people start to think about the ramifications of some of these. But the reality is right now the deep ecology movement has moved the game so far that really species protection has become worldwide more important than the protection of human life. And you only have to look at Africa to know that that is true. There are some deep ecologists believe that Africa should have all of its aid withdrawn and the AIDS epidemic allowed to just decimate the population, because that would stop the population growth there that they see as a real cancer on the earth. So this is a real opposite of what religion teaches. Religion teaches that with God we can do all things. The environmental movement teaches, deep ecology teaches that people are the problem and need to be eliminated or at least moved into small areas where they can't do any damage. So where we're at is the stewardship versus earth worship. Solutions are possible. Human life must have value that is more than species protection. And consumers must understand the cost of their consumption. In order to have true sustainability, people have to understand that every time they consume something, something has to be produced. And my goal is to make people understand that you can't replace God with science. You need science. God gives us science, but it's not a replacement tool. So there's cultivators of the earth are the most valuable citizens. They are the most vigorous. They are the most independent, the most virtuous, and they are tied to their country and wedded to its liberty and interests by the most lasting bands. So that is the end of my presentation, and I hope that that gives you a little bit more understanding of what I'm trying to tell you here. And this is such a deep subject. It's really like hours and hours and hours. And you were probably right. I probably needed to pick something much more, much smaller and much more targeted. But I hope this gives you some ideas. And I have hundreds of hours of material, and would love to get into this subject even more as I go along in my studies. But that's where I'm at now. Thank you for your time.